We are entering week 12 of fantasy football, and you guys need startable options in your lineups. Whether you're without guys like Breece Hall, guys like Chase Brown, there are multiple fantasy football hammers that will be unavailable in week 12. So I got you covered with my 10 sneaky starts for fantasy football this week. It is crunch time. We are going into week 12. We are 3 weeks away from the fantasy football playoffs, and making the right call in your lineup could mean the difference between booking your spot or missing the song and dance altogether, and I know which side I'd rather be on. But let's waste no more time and let's get straight to the wide receivers, starting off with Rome Odunze of the Chicago Bears, going to play his division rival Minnesota Vikings at home this week, and he's been quietly building momentum since the team bye week. In the game since weeks 8 to 11, we do see a 30% target share, 19% target share, 25% target share, and 32% target share in those 4 games. And he's actually out-targeted DJ Moore in that stretch. What Thomas Brown brought in terms of structure, in terms of easy layups in this offense, quick yards in the yak game, we saw Rome Odunze really take a step up this past week, and I'm extremely bullish on this Bears offense moving forward. I really think with Caleb Williams now feeling a lot more comfortable behind that offensive line, with Rome Odunze settling in after that post-bye rookie bump, a phrase coined by Hayden Winks multiple times in the past, I've used on this channel. Basically what we see from these rookies as they go on in their rookie seasons is increased scale production as the weeks go on. After the bye week, we've seen that from Rome Odunze. We knew he was a top 10 level wide receiver prospect, and everything that I was saying coming into the year of these talented playmakers will take the Bears offense over the top, I really do feel like that could be the case moving forward with Thomas Brown taking over for Shane Waldron. So going into this matchup against Minnesota, Minnesota is an extremely pass funnel defense, and I have Rome Odunze ranked as a top 30 wide receiver in my rankings this week. I think Caleb's going to get going. I think Rome Odunze is going to continue playing the way he has been, and I think there's a real possibility we finally see that ceiling Rome Odunze week. Moving on to the second name on this list, we have Xavier Worthy of the Kansas City Chiefs going on the road to play Carolina this week, and he finally got out of his recent funk this past week and has an extremely high ceiling going up against Carolina. 4.2 speed, connected to Patrick Mahomes. Really, we've seen him be involved down the field. It's just more often than not, we have not seen him and Mahomes really connect on that deep ball. And we saw this past week Xavier Worthy take strides as a player. Like I mentioned with Rome Odunze, there is still learning curves for these talented rookie wide receivers, and I really do think that was affecting Xavier Worthy more often than the average rookie. We saw him this past week really start to figure it out, and I do think there's a possibility the guy that we were drafting in the top 6 rounds of our redraft leagues, the guy that was going in the 4th round of best ball leagues, there's a real opportunity, like I mentioned with Rome Odunze, we see scale production from Xavier Worthy moving forward. Outside of DeAndre Hopkins and Travis Kelce, this Chiefs offense needs reliable pass catchers, and while Xavier Worthy hasn't really been that this year, we have seen Mahomes try to connect to him down the field. Just unfortunately, more often than not, that connection has not yielded fantasy points. Like even in the game, he had -1, had that toe tap on the sideline really early in the game, was not able to come down with it. If we start seeing some more of those plays be converted for Xavier Worthy, I think he can be a boom-bust high-end wide receiver 3 moving forward. I have him right now in the mid to late portion of my wide receiver 3 rankings, but I do recognize that this is an extremely high ceiling. Like I said, if him and Mahomes can just figure out that connection, we could see a guy that can be a 15-plus point per game scorer down the stretch of the year. We know Hopkins is going to demand volume. We know Kelce is going to demand volume. But what Worthy brings to this offense is unlike any other player on this team based off the speed he operates at. But moving on to the third wide receiver, we have Nick Westbrook-Ikhine of the Tennessee Titans going up on the road to play Houston. And for simplicity's sake, I will be referring to him here as NWI. But if you've been playing NWI or if you have rostered NWI in these last few weeks, you'll know he's been on an extreme tear as of late and going up against an extreme pass funnel defense that Houston represents. There's an evident ceiling for Nick Westbrook-Ikhine this week. And for Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, we saw him being, a partial player earlier in the year, had 2 straight touchdowns on 40% of the snaps. But once the team traded away DeAndre Hopkins, we have seen him become a full-time player. 85+% snap share in each game since then, and a 13.43 PPR point per game rate in the last month of the season. He has been touchdown dependent, but we know Will Levis is willing to throw the ball down the field. We know he's going to be willing to throw it in harm's way. And NWI has actually played some solid football, evidenced by that 98-yard catch and run he had last week. Really with NWI, the schedule is opening up down the stretch. We are seeing the Titans inherently throw the football more. Tajay Spears is dealing with a concussion. Tony Pollard's been banged up in these last few weeks. I think there's a real possibility with Levis back, we continue to see the Titans relying upon that passing game, and NWI has clearly established himself as the number 2 in this offense after Calvin Ridley. But moving on to the running back position, we start off with Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos, and he is very risky. I'm not going to say he's the safest projection out there. Like we saw, for example, against KC, we can't really predict what the usage will be in this backfield based off of Sean Payton's tendencies, because Javonte Williams across the full year has been the team's RB1, but as we saw in that week, only 29% of the snaps got usurped by Audric Estime in the pecking order. However, Javonte bounced back to a majority workload last week, and he still goes up against a very vulnerable Vegas defense that ranks top 3 on the matchup chart against opposing running backs this season, and the same Vegas defense that Javonte himself had 17.1 PPR points per game earlier this year. I get it. He's been a volatile RB3. He's been very matchup dependent, but assuming he gets that similar workload he saw last week, I think Javonte Williams has a low-end RB2 level appeal in this matchup against Vegas. But moving on to the second sneaky start at running back, we have Austin Eckler of the Washington Commanders going up against Dallas this week. He can very well be past the sneaky start stage. I mean, he's been very good, top 15 level running back in the last 3 weeks, but he's still being started in less than 60% of sleeper leagues, so I do have to mention him. He has been on a tear, and I understand Brian Robinson will limit his ceiling. Like, if Brian Robinson is healthy, we can expect him to handle the majority of the carry workload between the tackles, but as we saw this past week against Philadelphia, Austin Eckler is still the main receiving back on this team, on a team that needs pass catchers after Terry McLaurin. There's a real possibility we continue to see this elite level of receiving volume being peppered to Austin Eckler. He's a proven receiving back in this league. We know this is still a 1-2 punch with Brian Robinson, and I think against Dallas, a defense that is ready to phone it in at this point. I mean, after losing Dak Prescott, we've seen in these last 2 weeks, they give up 34 points per game to Houston and to Philadelphia in those 2 matchups. There's a real possibility Washington's offense can back on track, and that's why I'm still trusting Austin Eckler as a top 24 running back, even despite having Brian Robinson as an RB1 in my rankings this week. In a similar case with a timeshare running back, we have Trey Benson of the Arizona Cardinals going on the road to play Seattle this week. He's been a top 24 running back in each of their 2 weeks prior to the bye week and saw 2 of his 3 biggest seasonal workloads in those 2 games. Now he has the bye week. I don't really want to keep making this point home, but like I mentioned with Xavier Worthy, like I mentioned with Roma Dunze, we typically see rookies scale up after their bye. Benson was a top 2 graded running back for me in the NFL draft, and I really do think his skill set bodes well to complement what James Conner does. I'm not going to go out there and say he's going to usurp James Conner. He's going to be the main running back 1 on this team. However, he's explosive, he's adept in the passing game, and in those 2 games prior to the bye week, he took his 21 touches for 142 yards from scrimmage. So from a standalone standpoint, I think he profiles as a low-end running back 3 in a solid, high-scoring game environment against Seattle, but when you combine the implied value, the implied upside, should Conner, a guy who hasn't made it through an entire healthy season in his entire NFL career, if he were to go down against Seattle, we know Benson has top 10 implied upside. So when you're combining the fact that he's a fringe top 36 level projection, giving him a standalone role, but if Conner were to go down, he'd be a top 10 level projection. I ended up landing on RB31 for him this week. I want to trust talented players and good offenses, and I think that's what Trey Benson represents, especially if you're in need for running back play. But moving on to quarterback, we start off with Drake May of the New England Patriots going up against Miami this week. And in the games he started and finished this year, Drake May averages 18.4 PPR points per game, and we've seen him use his legs multiple times to mask that lack of receiving talent in New England. With Miami, again, they are a very good pass defense, but May is not unfamiliar with those as of late. And with Drake May, like I said, he's been throwing the ball 35 times per game in the starts that he's had, but he's also contributing 40 rushing yards per game. If we continue to see his passing efficiency go up while also being supplemented by the rushing volume that he has, there's an opportunity Drake May can establish himself as a top 8 fantasy quarterback. So I get it. It is a tough matchup against Miami, but I really just think Drake May at this point, with the rushing upside he brings to the table, with the Konami ability he brings with that arm talent, has the opportunity to establish himself as kind of that baby Josh Allen, if you will. But moving on to the second streaming quarterback, and he's kind of like the anti-Drake May in the sense that with Drake May, it's a bad game environment, it's a bad overall offensive situation, but I trust the arm talent and I trust the mobility to create his fantasy points. Jared Goff is the complete opposite because we love the fantasy environment for him in terms of the offensive line, in terms of the play caller, in terms of the over-under this game. 8th worst defense against opposing quarterbacks this year. However, the cause for concern that I have for Goff simply has to do with his volume in this game. We've seen Jared Goff this year be very efficient distributing the football, but there's times where because Detroit's just so damn good, they're throwing the ball 25 times. They're throwing the ball 23 times in a game. That makes it hard for Jared Goff to hit home, to the point where if they go up in this matchup, do they lean on the run game? Do they lean on Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery to get them over the top? I really do think there's a possibility that if you have Jared Goff, he needs to hit in the first quarter and the second quarter, because once the third quarter goes on, fourth quarter goes on, we have seen them rely on this ground attack. So I still have to treat Jared Goff as a must-start option because this is too good of a matchup, too good of a game environment. And if you do have Jared Goff, why are you not starting him in this type of spot? He's risky, of course, because we have seen the floor kind of bottom out, but we also saw the ceiling last week where if the production is supplemented in the passing game, Jared Goff is tethered to the best situation in the NFL. So I really toggle back and forth on this, but ultimately what I come down to is if you roster Jared Goff and you're not starting him this week, what is the point of having him on your roster? And then finally, moving on to the tight ends, we start off with Will Dissly going up against the Baltimore Ravens, and he's been on a tear since the Chargers bye week, commanding 5+ targets in 5 of his last 6 games. And this hasn't come by coincidence, as you guys can see from this tweet from Ron Stewart. This LA Chargers offense since the bye week has exploded on the surface. We see, for example, before the bye, 23rd in EPA per play, 31st in neutral pass rate. Since the bye week, that has gone up to 12th in EPA per play and 2nd in neutral pass rate. With how Herbert's been playing, with the amount of volume we're starting to see in this offense, there's real possibility for these Chargers weapons to scale up moving forward. Pass funnel Ravens defense, single highest over-under of the entire slate. I have Will Dissly as a tight end 1, top 8 to 10 level tight end in my rankings, and I think you can make the case he has a top 5 ceiling given the game environment for this Chargers offense. And the same applies to Jonnu Smith, who has also been on a tear, goes up this week against New England, and with Jonnu Smith, he's had 6+ targets in 5 of his last 6 games, and we've seen him have a ceiling. Like, for example, last week, 6 catches, over 100 yards, 2 receiving touchdowns, 30+ PPR points from your tight end spot. That is what Jonnu can bring to the table from a ceiling perspective. He's got that great calc ability. We have seen this offense look completely night and day with Tua in versus out of the lineup. And with how Mike McDaniel is scheming him opportunities in the YAC game, I think this is the perfect fit for Jonnu Smith. He's outplayed Jalen Waddle. He has been a top 3 target on their team as of late. And I really do trust with how he's been playing for him to establish himself as a top 10 tight end moving forward, similar to Dissly. But either way, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below, comment your biggest start sit decision. I'll try to get to as many as possible. And of course, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We are on the road to 60,000 subscribers. I appreciate y'all for that continued support. But with that being said, peace out. We'll talk to you soon. See you tomorrow for wide receiver rankings.